G'day, I'm Owen. Welcome to the Pub Test, and this is the second episode in the official Pub Test podcast. And many cases in this podcast will look at situations that have lots of unanswered questions, yet this one, many people will say, has already been fully answered. There's no mystery here. Yet hang around till the end, because I still have one question left that I cannot find anywhere that anybody has touched on to do with this particular case. And I'm throwing in a little funny outtake right at the end, just for the fun of it. But this week we are looking at Greg Fleniken, the man from room 348 of the Elegante Hotel in Beaumont, Texas. I have to say, I'd never heard of any of this until this was recommended to me. And as I dived in and did the research, it really was a head scratcher. This truly was a whodunit mystery. So who was Greg Fleniken? Well, he was basically, I would suggest, a self-made man. He had worked in the oil and gas industry, but he did a lot of offshore work. But then, as he got married and wanted to spend more time at home, he moved that business to more onshore work, so he didn't have to be away for months on end. And his business was to go to private landholders and basically get rights so that they could explore those private properties for oil and gas. Now, I have a little bit of an understanding of that because I live in an area where we have coal seam gas mining, we've got underground coal mining, we've also got large-scale farming. And there's two sides to this argument. There's a lock the gate alliance. Don't let those bludgers on your land for anything. And then you've got the other side where people say open the gates because these companies bring in money. And that's where someone like Greg Fleniken would come in. He would go to those properties, show them the benefits of allowing that exploration, and then potentially the farmer would reap the benefits of having that infrastructure on their place. But as a result, he travelled on the road a little bit and stayed in hotels. In Australia, we call them motels because a hotel is a place where you go and get your skewies, your drinks. And it's said that Greg would stay at this Elegante hotel in Beaumont quite frequently. And I looked it up, and on TripAdvisor, it's still rated as the #1 hotel in Beaumont, Texas for the last 14 years. So it's a bit of a fancy place. So Greg was doing quite well for himself, and perhaps he had a regular room 348. I don't know that for sure, but I've also worked in an industry where I was on the road a little bit, and I stayed in lots of motels, quite a lot. And when you get to know the owners of the place, they often let you pick your room when you ring up to make your booking because you're a regular customer, and Greg was. So he got the room, or a room, overlooking the pool area. And you might think, well, why do you really need to overlook the pool area when you're staying in a hotel or motel? Well, quite simply, when you're on the road a lot and you settle down for the night, it's just nice to open the curtains just for a little bit and have a bit of a view to debrief the day. Just relax a little. Now, I stayed in a place down in Melbourne not all that long ago, a couple of years back, and I got into that motel, opened the curtain, and I was looking at a brick wall next door. That really didn't brighten my spirits at all. So it is important just for that moment, because in a hotel, you're going to close those curtains. You don't want people looking in, but you just want that brief moment to enjoy yourself. And then you go about your next process, setting up for the night. Yes, you unpack your bag, or you might just put your bag down. For me, it was set the laptop up, put the sport on the TV, maybe play a computer game before I head off to bed for the evening. His process was a little different. And this process, though, is very important to this mystery. He would put a towel down beside him on the bed, then put his ashtray on that towel, then recline back, flick on the telly with, on his little bedside table, a bit of chocolate and a soft drink. Yes, Greg was a chain smoker. Now, that still surprises me that he was smoking inside the motel room, but that was allowed. I don't know if it still is in the United States, but in Australia, smoking inside a motel room has been banned for quite some time. But I have heard even now that some parts of the United States still allow smoking inside restaurants, and that quite surprises me. I'm not judging anyone who's smoking out there. You can knock yourself out. But Greg, he was a chain smoker. And he'd be sitting there puffing away most of the night before he camped out. But just interesting, I find the fact that he'd put the towel down on the bed around the ashtray just shows the type of person he was. Like, he didn't take the motel or hotel for granted and just think, oh, they can clean up. He looked after the place. And that shows decent type of character. The fact he was a chain smoker and ate chocolate and drank soft drink also says something about him. He wasn't into that big health kick of exercising or worrying too much about your diet. He wasn't a heavy drinker, though he would have alcohol. He didn't overeat, though he ate whatever he wanted. But he wasn't unhealthy. The photos I've seen of him showed someone that was fairly decent looking for someone in his mid-50s. Now, it's said that Greg Fleniken, in room 348 of the Elegante Hotel, is reclining back as he usually did. He's got the TV on, watching Iron Man 2, and then he feels a sudden burst of pain. It gets him up off the bed. He takes about 1 or maybe 2 steps, and he collapses on the floor. And he's now dead. And so begins the mystery of what happened in room 348. Now, nobody had heard from Greg since that evening. And Susie, his wife, last heard from him at 7 p.m. when he sent her back an email to do with taxes. But she's waiting on that morning call. Yes, it was regular for him when he was on the road to ring home before he started his day. But that call never came. So she rang into the work office and said, hey, has anyone seen Greg? Well, the office then say, well, he hasn't actually shown up here either. So they send 2 people down to the Elegante Hotel. Well, he hasn't checked out. He hasn't returned the key. So they send the manager with the 2 co-workers, unlock the door. They see Greg lying on the floor. So obviously emergency services are called. So the police turn up, and it's Sergeant Apple who takes the lead. And he looks around the room and sees really nothing of note. Here's a middle-aged man, keeled over. A bit of stain around the crotch area of Greg. But that's not uncommon when someone passes away, because they lose parts of their bodily function. So nothing stood out. There was no major blood anywhere. It's just most likely that Fleniken has passed away from a heart attack or some other natural causes. They do bring in the crime scene photographer who gets some photos just to cover all bases. They check his belongings. There's $100 bills in his wallet, quite a few of them. So he wasn't robbed. The police look through his bag and look for pills. Maybe he's overdosed on something. Well, there's no medication at all. And in fact, Greg Fleniken never went to the doctor, or hardly ever went to the doctor. He was very skeptical of the medical industry. And so it's suggested that this lifestyle of bad eating and chain smoking has finally caught up with him. They do the regular door knock around and chase up the people who were staying in the Elegante Hotel, who were basically his neighbours for the evening. And there's nothing of note. Sergeant Apple tells them that most likely this man died of natural causes. Now, this could be considered a comfort to the people that loved Greg Fleniken. The fact that he finally just passed away due to some type of major organ failure, and it was very quick. He didn't suffer and he went out on his own terms. And many people say, well, if you're going to go out, that's the way to go. And so it would appear that was the life of Greg Fleniken. Case closed. There's nothing left to see here. But they do send the body. But then enters Dr. Brown. He's doing the autopsy because naturally they have to confirm or show what caused this death. Now there is an odd injury to Fleniken's scrotum area. There's a bit of an abrasion there. And he's got bruising all around his thighs, right around to the right hip. Massive bruising. Dr. Brown finds that part of the food that Greg had eaten that evening has gone outside of the stomach area. So there was an injury somewhere there. He then notices that there were 2 broken ribs. And so he brings back a finding that this was a homicide. Greg Fleniken had been murdered. His suggestion was that the injury to the groin area could have come from one big solid kick. And perhaps the other injuries were consistent with a car accident or being hit with something really, really heavy. Like something's fallen on you and crushed you. But how could this happen? It was a locked room. Nobody heard anything. There was no sign of a forced entry into that room either. So firstly, motive had to be considered. Who would want Greg Fleniken out of the picture? Because it said that even though he was quite the successful businessman, he was a really likeable bloke. He got along with everybody. And I actually point to the fact that he put the towel beside him when he was smoking in that room, showed the type of bloke that he was. Not one of these arrogant people that expects people to serve him. He looked after other people. He knew someone would have to come in and clean up. And he didn't want to make that difficult for them. And I would say that that's how he conducted himself throughout his life. Because nobody had a bad word against him. But naturally, the first point of call would have to be a spouse. You know, bit of life insurance. So they look into Susie. And they soon work out that there really was nothing there. They had a very good relationship. And it was safe to say that there was really nothing to gain for her by him being out of the picture. And that's proven as we go through this as well. But then they look at his brother, because Greg and his brother were in business together, and perhaps his brother wanted him out of the picture so he could take over the whole show. Well, that's also very soon discounted. And in fact, the family play a major part in working this out as well. And he wasn't known for going out of an evening when he's on the road. Like, yeah, away from the ball and chain, away from the wife, so I'm going to go out and party, drink, pick up a woman or two. You know, and then, or maybe splash some cash around at a strip joint, and some nefarious people see you and think, well, I'm going to go rob you. He wasn't that type of person. He'd just settle in for the night, watch his TV, get up and go back to work. So that wasn't the case either. And plus, there was no robbery in there because he still had his money. So this is really turning into a mystery. Why would anyone attack this man? Well, there were 2 theories that they started coming up with. Firstly, it was found out that the maintenance man at the time at the Elegante hotel did have a criminal record. He was a registered sex offender. Don't know exactly what he did wrong. But it was then thought, because of the injury to the groin area, that perhaps Greg and this bloke may have had some type of weird dalliance that's gone terribly wrong. But that was just wild speculation because there was absolutely no proof of that at all. And then they're looking at the people next door. Now, this is interesting. See, a group of electricians were staying in the Elegante hotel. They were there for a big project. There was about 9 of them or so. 2 of them were sharing a room next door to Greg Fleniken. But you see, these blokes, now I can understand. In Australia, we refer to most construction workers as tradies, and electricians are known as sparkies. And if they're away on a job, at the end of the evening, they will tend to have a few brewskis. And because they're staying all in the same hotel, they will meet up in each other's rooms and chat and drink and then pass out. But a weird event happened that evening. See, Greg Fleniken was in room 348, and there were sparkies next door in room 349, but Greg's thrown his popcorn in the microwave, and somehow that's tripped the circuit. And it's knocked out a fair bit of the power to his room, the sparkies' room, and a couple of other rooms around. Now, you would think, being electricians, they could go down and quickly fix that issue, and it was just flick on the breaker back on, it's no big deal. But it was suggested that perhaps the sparkies, because they're getting into their drinks, now they've lost their power, they've gone and knocked on his door, bit of an altercation's happened, they've beaten him, and then left him to die in the room. Except the body did not show signs of a beating. See, and that is the ridiculous thing here. There was no evidence that someone had just ploughed into this guy. So that theory as well is discounted. And also these sparkies say, well, we didn't even know that bloke. Wouldn't have a clue who he was. So the day when they found the body, Sergeant Apple did go and talk to these electricians and found them very easy to get along with. But when he found out this was homicide, he thought, well, I better cover all my bases, and he went back and this time wore a hidden body camera, just perhaps if he could maybe pick up some information that could point him in the right direction. So he goes to Lance Muller. Now, he was the one registered in room 349, but he was sharing with Tim Steinmetz. And Muller is quite concerned. He said, well, what happened to that bloke next door? Because we saw a body being taken out. And Sergeant Apple says, well, it looks like something crushed him. Something fell on him. And Muller goes, but there'd be nothing in that room heavy enough. What could have possibly fell on him? And the other thing is, if something fell on the bloke and crushed him, it still should be sitting on top of him. But then he talks to three more of these electricians, particularly Trent Passano. But anyway, he was actually in the room in 349 when the power went out as well. And again, there was really nothing to see or anything to say. Now, all the electricians give their phone numbers to Sergeant Apple and say, look, we're in town for a few more months. Give us a call if you need us to provide any more information. But this is a total head-scratcher. Now, Sergeant Apple, after all this investigation, hasn't really gone very far. He's got no motive. He doesn't have the real weapon or the cause, what struck Greg Fleniken. And this case is close to going cold. But the family, they want answers, so they put up a $50,000 reward for any information that would lead to the solution to this mystery. They even hire an FBI agent, a former FBI agent, to look into it. They lay out all the information, and this FBI agent walks away. He's got no idea. He's totally baffled. But then Susie, Greg's wife, reaches out to an investigator, Ken Brennan. Now, from what I've seen, he's actually appeared on some TV shows to do with cold cases, and he's a bit of a guru, sort of like a Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot, in looking at a situation and being able to decipher the details to get the answers. Now, it's said that he's offered way too many cases than what he can handle, and he'll only step in if he thinks, one, he can make a difference, or two, if this will basically challenge the mind. And this particular case ticked both boxes, because he thought, yeah, if he looked over it, he'd probably find the solution. And also, this mystery was very complicated. And it's also said that Ken doesn't just go in all guns blazing saying, I'm going to take over this case. No, he works with law enforcement so that they can get the right result. So he works along with Sergeant Apple. Now, he believes he worked out when the time of death was, because there was a weird little detail when they first opened that room. And it was something that Susie said didn't make any sense. Because when they opened the room, they said it was extremely warm and very stuffy. The air conditioner was not on. And Susie knew that Ken liked the cold room. He would crank that AC as low as it could go so that it was nice and chill. So they suggest that when the power tripped, which was around 8 o'clock, that by the time power got restored, he settled down on the bed and the room hadn't quite warmed up yet. So he didn't notice the air conditioner hadn't turned back on. And then he's passed away. And the heat in Texas at that time, when this event happened, the temperature in that room would have got to a stifling point very quickly at that time of year. So it said his death must have occurred around 8:30 p.m. And Brennan says, well, the cigarette's in his left hand. So they check with Susie, is he right or left-handed? And she says he's right-handed. And in fact, that makes sense when you see the pictures of where he was lying on the bed, apparently. So he would have had the ashtray off to his right and the drinks and everything on his left-hand side. Because you're not going to reach across your body with your left hand to put the ash in the ashtray. So why was it significant that the cigarette was in his left hand then? Because whatever happened meant he got up off the bed, moved the cigarette to his other hand to reach for the door to open it. They go back to Dr. Brown, who did the autopsy, and they say, well, how could that injury around his groin area have occurred? And Dr. Brown says a massive, forceful blow. Possibly someone kicking you with steel cap boots. Well, the electricians next door were construction workers, so they would have had steel cap boots. So they decide, we better go back and talk to these electricians. So they go and talk to the foreman of these electricians, the bloke who had to control these guys, and I'd say good luck with that. And his name was Aaron Baroque. I think that's how it's pronounced. And they ask him the question, look, do you know of anything that happened at the Elegante Hotel? He says, oh, look, are you talking about the time there was a bit of a scuffle and a gun was fired? Yeah, apparently a gun was fired at this hotel. And Sergeant Apple says, no, that was a different event. That was a different time. And he goes, oh, well, look, I've got nothing then. That must have triggered something for Ken Brennan. Because he says, we're going back to room 348 and we're looking for a bullet. So they get access to room 348. There's really nothing to see except there's a small patch near the door handle. And it's the type of area that you would see if someone hit the doorknob into the wall. Except it's offset just a little bit. The doorknob misses it by a bit. And so Brennan says, well, let's go next door into room 349. And in room 349, there's a similar little patch. So they scratch out that patch. Because in a hotel, you see these little maintenance patches. When you stay in one, if you see a bit of damage, you know, well, it's like not my place. You know, someone's probably coming in to fix it. They can't fix everything immediately. And that's what it looked like, just a quick patch job. But it turns out it was patched with a bit of toothpaste. That's not normally what maintenance people would do. But after scratching out both these patches, they shine a laser light through the hole. And they see that's the trajectory of where a bullet would have struck Greg Fleniken lying on the bed. They go back to Dr. Brown and they say, we are believing this bloke was shot. And Dr. Brown's like, there is absolutely no way. I've checked it out. He was crushed by something. Remembering there's no external signs of someone beating this bloke or something falling on him. So they look and see in the pictures there was a hole right around the heart. So a bullet has gone up through his groin area, through most of his internal organs, and pierced his heart. And that's what caused him to jump up. That's what caused him to take just 1 or 2 steps before falling on the ground. And he's now passed away. Now, Dr. Brown realizes this is a monumental blunder, and he's worried about his professional reputation. But the evidence is the evidence, and that's definitely what happened. But now, it's time to go back and talk to those blokes in room 349, because something happened that evening. Now, for a moment, put yourself in Tim Steinmetz's place. Yes, he was one of the Sparkies in that room. It's been close to 8 months. You've been gone from Beaumont for quite some time. You may have even forgotten about that incident that evening. Then you get a phone call from the police. We just need to ask you some questions about what happened in the Elegante hotel that particular evening when your neighbour passes away. You're probably feeling a bit nervous because we now know something did happen in that room. A bullet was fired in that room. So Tim is now sitting down, probably a little bit nervous, because you haven't come forward with the true story of what happened. But it was Ken Brennan and Sergeant Apple talking to him. They just asked some general questions, what happened that evening. He goes through his regular story. Yep, really nothing to see. And they go, well, thank you for your time. We'll leave now. He goes, oh, is that all you came for? You honestly just flew all this way out just to ask me a couple of quick questions. They go, oh, actually, we need you to sign this statement. Can we just go through what you told us and then sign on the line and then we're gone? He goes, sure. And they correct a couple of little details. And then he signs the statement. They turn, Brennan and Sergeant Apple turn to walk out. And then swing back and say, well, actually, we've got a problem now because you've just given a false statement to the police. You've signed it. Now, that is interesting because we know police can lie to you to get a confession. But would they arrest you for a false statement if they didn't know what you were saying was false? That would be tricky, I would suggest. But that was the setup. They wanted to get him to sign that paper, then they could arrest him. And they sit down and say, we know something happened in that room. You have to tell us the story. Because if you don't, you'll be going to prison. Do you want that for your family? Do you want that hanging over your head for the rest of your life as a convicted felon? So Tim spills the beans. He says basically what happened is, okay, the power goes out. We're up there drinking. I'm there with Muller and Passano. Muller sends Passano down to get some extra alcohol from the vehicle. And Muller says, can you bring up my gun as well? Now, these blokes are 3 sheets to the wind. They are hammered. And Muller is mucking around with his gun. He points it at Tim Steinmetz. He hits the ground because he's thinking this bloke's going to shoot me. And in that moment, the gun accidentally gets fired. Now it's Passano who thought that he'd been hit. When he found out that he wasn't shot, he just stormed out. He said, you're an idiot, mate, and just left the room. So it was Muller who fired the gun. To cover up the hole, they decide to do a quick patch job. Remember, they're electricians, not builders. So they use toothpaste to cover this little bullet hole. They don't consider to go knock next door to see if the bloke in room 348 is okay. Even though they say, Steinmetz says, he heard the bloke coughing around about midnight. That could not have been the case. But that would make it worse if that was true, that they didn't go check on the bloke who may have been injured from a bullet going into his room. Now, the chances of that bullet causing the injuries it did are just unbelievably minute. It was the perfect trajectory to cause the injuries that it did. But if it was just off by a little bit, if Muller had been anywhere else in the room, it just would have scared the life out of Greg Fleniken and not ended his life. But Muller is arrested. Muller got 10 years for manslaughter. And he did even hide the gun. Like, he probably realized this isn't a good thing. He may not have fully known that he had killed Greg Fleniken. In fact, he did ask, what happened to that bloke? And because he was told it was probably a heart attack, he's like, whew, got away with that. Though, that bullet going through the room could have caused the heart attack. But then when they're told it could have been someone, like something crush him, he's also feeling good. Well, at least it wasn't the bullet. When they found out it was the bullet, it was too late for Muller. Had he have come forward earlier and said, look, I was goofing off, I was mucking around, I was drunk. Yes, he would have been in trouble, but probably not as much trouble as he got into. But it is a good warning why you should not carry a weapon or handle a gun when you are drunk. Because bad things can happen, and this tragically ended the life of a really, really nice bloke. And on a side note, Susie had to go through the loss of her beloved husband, and that would have been very, very difficult. But she was a singer, or is still a singer, I should say, and released a song called Changes, speaking about how you move on from such a tragic loss. And I think it's under her name, Susie Aycock, if you want to look it up and check out that song. But all in all, a very senseless, tragic accident took place in room 348. Yet we would say all the questions have been answered, except I've got one. The bullet hole in room 348. Now, it's said that Muller and Steinmetz did not go into that room and do the patch. So did Sergeant Apple miss the hole in the wall? Because there should have been some plaster on the ground. Now, if that was missed, that's an obvious big miss. The maintenance people at the Hotel Elegante, surely they would have seen a hole and notified someone. Particularly seeing the rough patch job with some toothpaste in the other room. That surely should have flagged some questions well before this. So I speculate, and this is total speculation, but the only way I could reconcile that not being seen is that the Sparkies did get access to that room, and they did know that Greg Fleniken was no longer alive. How could they get into the room without busting the door down? The maintenance bloke. They go to him and say, hey, look, help out a fellow construction dude. Let us into that room. We got a quick patch job to do. So they clean up that area, cover over the hole. Also, they turn the air conditioner off. Why? Because they want that to cure quickly. So the coolness in the room would prevent that from happening. And I say that was the case because if you've ever been in a motel room, hotel room, in the heat, it does not take long for those rooms to turn into hot boxes. You'd have that aircon on in no time at all. I cannot imagine Greg Fleniken lying back on the bed with no aircon in the middle of a Texas summer. But that is speculation. But I have not found any information at all that answers that question as to was there a hole in room 348 when Sergeant Apple was investigating it, because surely he would have seen it. And I can't get my head around that fact that Greg Fleniken did not restart the air conditioner when power was restored. And also, just giving away a little bit of information here, I'm a Sparky myself. I'm an electrician. I believe that the aircon would have been on a different circuit to the microwave. And it didn't say they lost all power. It was just partial power. I can't see how the aircon was connected to that particular circuit. So I don't think the air conditioner went off. But in saying all that, I don't think that needs to be dredged back up. It was tragic. People have paid the price. And as Susie Fleniken has said, you just got to move on. You got to get on with things. And there's no point in going back and trying to look at the past. But that is the story of the man in room 348. But let me know what you think of this one. Whatever platform you're on, show a little bit of support. If you're on YouTube, give us a like, give us a subscribe. I'm Owen, you've been watching the Pub Test, and we will see you on the next one. And thank you for hanging around, and just a little bit of an outtake when I was just starting to record this one. I know I was having a moment, but check it out. G'day. G'day, I'm Owen. You've joined the Pub Test.